Go Pizza presents SDP, the Steve Dangle Podcast, with your hosts, Steve Dangle, Adam Wilde, and Jesse Blake.
Let's go! Okay, guys, we're back. Chris Johnston is back, and hockey is back. Come on. Let's get excited. Let's get ready. Now, Chris, you just got off the phone with Kyle Dubas. I guess you and him just have like conversations directly all the time. Actually, it was a press conference in this particular case, but we actually delayed the recording of the show just so we could hear, what Kyle Dubas had to say. And I think that obviously there's a couple things in there that you mentioned that we're probably going to hit a little bit later on in the show. But kind of the Cole's notes are a lot of people kind of raised their hand and I guess raised an eyebrow when Nick Petan was left off the training camp roster. It looks like he's back on in place of Matt Hollowell. What else did you find out from Kyle Dubas? Because it was nothing crazy, was it?
I wouldn't say anything crazy, but there's some news. It's been a while since we've spoken with him. Austin Matthews is fit and healthy and been skating in Toronto. He's going to be there Monday for the first day of training camp. Nick Robertson also will be there, and it certainly sounds as though he's going to get a fair shot to play games in this playoffs. That just because he's young, he's 18, just because he has an entry-level contract that potentially the first year could be burned if he were to play 10 games. I don't think those things will get in his way of, potentially playing for the Leafs this summer, assuming that he earns his way onto the team. And Kyle kind of pointed out that, as camp goes along, they're going to have some scrimmages, and that's the kind of area where they'll look to see, how Robertson stacks up against men, basically. Because if you remember, guys, he didn't even skate in an exhibition game back in September when he went to camp. And so it's, he's had a pretty spectacular year in the OHL since. I would suggest with Andreas Johnsson's injury, that there's potentially some room there on the left side for him to play if he does perform well in camp. So that will be something we'll be watching closely. And as for Johnsson, he's still rehabbing after that knee surgery he had in February. He's actually back home in Sweden right now, but the Leafs feel if they advance past the best of 5 with Columbus, advance past the first round, that somewhere around the start of the second round, he could be eligible to rejoin them if they get that far.
Couple of big ifs there. Now we will get into that a little bit later in the show because obviously we do want to talk Toronto Maple Leafs and that sort of thing. But I think we got to start with the start of the negotiations for this. So we, jumping right in here, we've got 52 games in 9 days to start off the season as of August 1st, which is unbelievable. And I guess, from the beginning here, we figured there would be a deal in place for the players to play this year, and we knew that there was some sort of labor talk coming either this year or 3 years from now had they decided to extend it based on the previous deal. But, all of a sudden they come out with a deal that's 6 years of labor peace. They do a full extension, and it includes the NHLers going to the Olympics, which everybody wanted as well. And it's maybe the owners didn't want it, but the players wanted it. How did that conversation start? When did they say, let's not just worry about this season, let's get the next 6 sorted out?
Well, there's two things here. I think that the fact that the NHL and the NHLPA met right through last summer, being summer 2019, was huge here because, I think it's not so much that they had a deal done per se, but they'd had extensive talks about what an extension might look like. I think that those talks went very well. As we know in the past, these two sides don't always have a good history of being able to work through issues together. It's much more often than not been you versus me. You're wrong, we're right, this, that.
Yep.
Everyone misses 6 months of hockey or more, and then we finally do a deal under duress. I think the fact that last summer went well really set a good tone for these talks. And then really the key moment is that in the final week or so before the season went on pause, the PA and the league were on the phone with each other 24/7. I think that they recognized a few days out where this was likely headed in terms of the season having to be stopped, in terms of massive uncertainty, in terms of a huge blow to the league's business, as with most other major companies, both here and around the world, due to this pandemic. And instead of adopting that, I'm right, you're wrong, trying to fight over the $1 between them, I think that they focused on ways that they could best navigate these challenging times together. Instead of going against each other, they went and tried to find the way around the pandemic. And so, I got the sense that this was far more of a shared journey than even a negotiation. It's not to say at the end that there aren't some back and forth on some of the smaller items that are included in this deal. But this was a very peaceful process. It was not an easy process because, let's face it, what's underpinning this agreement and what's underpinned really the talks is there's no revenue. This league was going to make $4.8 to $5 billion in the 2019-20 season had everything just went the way we're used to it going. Well, no one knows, whether they'll even be able to play this playoffs. It's looking more hopeful. I'm trying to be optimistic, and what that'll mean. And then next year, how many people are going to be able to buy tickets and come into games? I think that's still a very open question. What happens the year after that? I mean, this is going to be a couple years. I think we're all pretty clear that this isn't going to be normal or what we used to think of as normal at the start of the 2019-20 season. And so basically they made a deal about how can we split less money than what we're used to amongst each other most fairly. And I think they've come up with a really creative solution under the circumstances. I'm totally been in the bag for international hockey, love best on best competition. And so I'm very pleased that we're going to see this next generation of stars get a chance to represent their countries in that kind of environment in the 2022 Olympics. And, I kind of wonder, is this just a moment in time, or is this maybe the start of what could be a peaceful next 20 years? I mean, that's what happened in baseball. They lost the 1994 World Series to a strike, and really until right now, they're finally having a fight when it comes to labor talks. But they've had about 25, 26 years in that sport of labor peace. I mean, perhaps this is the start of much better days unlike those that we've known, any of us that have been following the last decade or two.
I'm loving the optimism, CJ. I'm loving
I'm feeling good right now, man.
Are you?
I'm kind of gushing, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I love it.
Do you have a feeling of because I know as a fan, a lot of people are like, oh, this is awesome. I'm just going to sit on my couch for 9 straight days. But covering the first round of the playoffs it's a war. Usually it's complete calamity. And the precursor to that is going to be 52 games in 9 days. How are you feeling about covering all that nonsense?
Well, I'm excited to get off my couch. I'm excited to get out of my house. And I love where I live, but I live in a condo downtown Toronto. And I certainly can't complain. I still have a good life even in pandemic times than before, but I'm used to traveling and moving in general. And so for 4 months to be inside my 900 square feet working on the phone, obviously, my partner is doing the same. It's been different. It's been a huge change in our lives. I think probably like most people listening. So I'm excited by the idea, even if it's going to be weird and different and no fans, and I'll be wearing a mask and getting my temperature checked, that I'm going to, even as of tomorrow morning, go back to the Leafs practice rink and watch their first day of the summer training camp. And then, as we get into the games, I mean, obviously that's just going to be a sugar high, I think, for the first few days of watching all that. It'll be long, especially if we get some overtime and, have one of these 8 o'clock local starts, maybe not start till 9 or 9:30. I don't know exactly how they're going to handle that, but, I don't really care. Whatever happens next, I'm not complaining. If what happens next is that everyone stays healthy and safe, that they're able to play these games, I'm going to be happy no matter what it demands of me and my attention span.
Have they announced the rules for media members in the bubble? Like, how many of you guys will be in there?
It's going to be a limited number. The league hasn't told us specifically what that number is. I probably got ahead of myself here a little too, Jesse, because we haven't even actually officially done the accreditation process. So I guess there's probably a world where I don't get an accreditation. I don't know how that'll work exactly. But what we do know is that as a media member, when it comes to the game phase, you're not in the bubble with the players. You don't have to stay at a hotel. You're not subject to daily testing the way they are. And then the flip side of that is you never get anywhere near them. And so when you come to the game, if you do get accredited, you go to a very specific entrance. You do have a temperature check there. You have to report any symptoms. Assuming you're deemed to be healthy, you get in the building, you go watch from a very designated area, and then you leave. And any sort of media availability is done on Zoom or one of the other platforms, and you never get anywhere close to someone that's living the daily life in the bubble. So it'll be, I just think it'll be most weird, honestly, probably for fans on TV the same, just to be in an arena for a game that matters and have no atmosphere. I'm very curious to see, will they actually pipe the music into the building? Like, will we hear it, those of us in there? How is that going to feel? Are we going to be able to hear what the players are saying on the ice? I mean, I think even if you're in the upper bowl, which it sounds like media members probably will be, you probably will still be able to hear. It's going to be an empty building for the most part. So It's going to be wild. But, I mean, there were so many days during this, and I do pride myself on being optimistic, where I thought we'd never even get here. And now it does feel as though like this is something that's actually going to happen. I'm very fortunate it's going to happen, a kilometer and a half from my front door. And so, I just have to walk to Scotiabank Arena, hopefully they let me in and we get to watch and see what happens.
So, you talked about how the NHL and the NHLPA found a compromise. And I know CBA talk isn't everybody's favorite thing, but we do need to kind of cover this because I'm curious about this deal, as in like, what's different about it? What really changed? Did anything really major change?
The biggest change, and I'll try to use not too many annoying terms that make your eyes glaze over or your ears.
I appreciate that.
Have everyone who's listening look at their phones and try to see what's going on Twitter or whatever. But essentially in the past, since 2013, the league and players have split the money 50-50 in terms of what was brought in for a year. And the way this is going to work now is next season, the league isn't anticipating that very many revenues are going to be brought in. So if they had to continue to split that 50-50, and you were someone like, say, Austin Matthews, who was due to make $15 million, you would have most of that money taken away because 50% of the players' overall pot wasn't going to be enough to cover that. And so what this has done essentially, in very general terms, is next year the players are going to receive more than 50% of the overall revenues because the owners want to more closely honor those contracts, which obviously is beneficial to those players, especially the stars of our game, whether it's Connor McDavid, Marner, Matthews. All these guys have massive deals. Leon Draisaitl are owed a lot of money next year. So they're going to get to keep more of their money. And then over the course of the agreement, as the business comes back and looks more normal, the owners will get paid back through a variety of mechanisms. And so essentially, I think the owners are kind of fronting them a little bit of money at the start, and then the players are going to give some back over time. And then, within the CBA agreement, obviously there's some small rule tweaks and changes to some of the smaller rules. But I would say that is fundamentally where the compromise was, is that they had to find a system where we didn't just say, okay, it's the end of the year. We made $4.8 billion. Players, you get $2.4 billion. Owners, you get $2.4. They've had to come up with some other ways to make the money work because honestly, players were going to have to play for almost free next year, likely where revenues are going to go if this is going to happen. And so obviously that wasn't going to work. I mean, it's hard enough, and we can get into this, I'm sure, more, but players that are playing even in this summer's playoffs, and as much as we're excited about it, we shouldn't look past, there's a real human cost to this. I mean, these guys are being asked to give up a lot of personal freedoms. Obviously, we know some players aren't totally, for a variety of reasons, comfortable with it, and some are opting out. But, we shouldn't look past how difficult this will probably be, especially for those whose teams go on a long playoff run and have to spend a considerable amount of time living on, with not a lot of freedoms, not even the ability really to go walk around a corner with a coffee or just do the stuff that even in lockdown times we all are able to do at this point. I think in exchange for doing that, the players had to know that the next couple of years that they would be looked after too. And so, they found a way to do that with the deal. By everyone's own admission, Don Fear said this to reporters on Saturday. It's not perfect. There's parts of the agreement you might look at and say, well, that doesn't really make sense. But I think everything makes sense under the whole fact that this was signed in 2020. And as we know, in 2020, very little does make sense.
So you touched on some of the issues, obviously. I think only like half a dozen players have opted out. But even though 79% of players voted to approve the return to play, is that right?
That's right.
That's about, what was it, like 175 still voted against it. Do you know what their objections were, some of them?
Well, from what I've heard secondhand, there was a number. I mean, some just didn't like the CBA, and so it's not even connected to return to play. But they might have felt that the players could maybe push for more, at this particular time because they do have some, they have some leverage. I do think that there are other teams out there though where players are going to come, but for a variety of reasons, they would prefer not to be playing under these circumstances. And, obviously every player did get the right, at least through Monday night, to opt out without any penalty. They don't have to provide a reason. They don't have to explain to anybody. They just have to tell the team, the PA, and the league that they're not coming. But, I think it's hard for some to do that who might still not, that it not be their preference. And so, I've heard of some older players that voted against this, guys with families who think, It's going to be difficult. I mean, basically, it's going to be 6 weeks, give or take, in the bubble for any team that plays through the second round without seeing your family. And there's guys out there like you, Steve. I don't know if we can talk about this, who might have newborns or that are dealing with that and don't want to leave that all to their partner or what have you, or put that burden on their family, extended family, what have you. And so, I think a lot of the opposition came from those type of people. I know some specific teams didn't have, weren't that fond of it. Montreal, for example, which was the 24th of 24 teams included in this. I do think that there's some members of the team that aren't entirely enamored with the idea they're being brought back to play this. I mean, remember, this was a year where the Habs traded players away at the deadline as part of a looking ahead, rebuild, retool on the fly kind of approach. And they get a pretty tough matchup in the qualifying round against Pittsburgh. But those players are still going to play, I guess. So, there's all kinds of reasons for it. I do think that there's more players that probably aren't thrilled with playing that are still going to go ahead with it just because, that's what people do at work. Everyone's got to pull their load, but they did have an ability to try to vote against it. And so, I think we'll still see a few more opt-outs before Monday's deadline, but it's not going to be – evidently it's not going to be a great number unless there's a huge rush at the last minute.
Right. So with the whole hub city concept, like, what do you know about? You kind of gave us a little bit of a glimpse into what your life's going to be like. But my thing has always been like, they're going to be stuck in these two hotels, at least in Toronto, and I guess Edmonton's somewhat the same, in a lockdown campus like atmosphere, sort of like you being at university, only you can't leave. And what's a player's day-to-day going to look like if they're at Hotel X in Toronto? Like what can they do? How do they eat? Where do they go? Where do they work out? What's available to them?
Eating's probably the easiest part. Funny you mention that, because they have a lot of options on this front, which, I think, look, the league is doing everything it can while trying to execute this safely to make sure the players are comfortable or are feeling as good as they can about this, while recognizing that's probably impossible. But for eating, teams are going to each have a conference room area where they do team meetings, which would happen normally on the road as well. And there'll be catered meals in there at certain times. If that doesn't suit your fancy, you can order anything you want from room service within the hotel. That's just, at any point in time, you're in your room, you want something, it's on the menu, it's yours. If that isn't good enough, my understanding is there's going to be some food trucks and other things brought in, probably on the CNE grounds in Toronto, which is where Hotel X is. And so there'll be some extra options outside for that. And if that isn't even good enough, there's one more, and you can order from local restaurants. It won't be, I don't suspect, like an Uber Eats kind of vibe for the rest of us, but it gets delivered to a specific area of the secure zone, as it's called, the bubble. All the food and packaging will be wiped down, or the packaging will be wiped down, and then it will be passed on to the player. But, the players, you could put on the freshman 15 here if it was me or you going in there. But I'm sure these guys are probably going to be a little more mindful of that. But eating is not going to be an issue. Everything else is going to be more complicated, though. Even down to the fact the Hotel X in Toronto, which is the best hotel, the primary hotel that's being used in the Toronto hub, it's got a great workout facility and everything. But everything has to be scheduled, because not only do you have players, staying there from 5 teams, the top 5 teams in the Eastern Conference by points percentage, you also have staff members and potentially some NHL staff, and they don't want those people in the workout room at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so everything like that has to be scheduled, for example. There's a whole protocol about how you use the elevator. Fingers aren't allowed. You're supposed to use a knuckle or your arm, your elbow, what have you, to hit elevator buttons. The list goes on and on. We're talking about 100 pages almost of legalese. A lot of it's to do with testing protocol and some other things that aren't just about how you live your life. But, in reading that when it came out a week or so ago, guys, that's where it hit me. Like, yes, these guys are obviously very fortunate to do what they do in their life. It's cool to get a chance to play for the Stanley Cup, but this is not anything like you or I have ever lived under. I don't want to give us too much of a headline, but it's like 5-star jail, kind of. To be truthful,
there's the name of the show right there.
Oh my God!
You can't just leave. Is the point? Right. The only accepted reasons to leave is if you have some sort of medical issue or appointment with a doctor that's outside the zone. There will be some team outings on days off, for example, maybe going golfing or something like that. So the teams will leave the bubble then, the secure zone. Obviously, they leave when they go play games or practice because the Leafs are using their practice rink at Etobicoke and the game rink at Scotiabank for games. And beyond that, there is a special exemption for anyone who has a birth in the family, a death in the family, some extenuating circumstances where they can leave, for a couple of days if their GM gives them permission to. And then when they come back, they have to isolate for a period of at least 4 days and produce some negative tests. But the point is that even if you're the Maple Leafs and their secure zone is at the Royal York downtown, and even if your family lives 15 minutes north of there, I mean, you can't go up and see them. I don't know if there's going to be a fence. Maybe you can view them through the fence. I don't know if that's allowed. It wasn't accounted for in the rules. But, I mean, it's going to be a very weird experience. And I think that it will be difficult. I think that the teams that find a way to embrace the suck, embrace how it's going to be a drag some days. I think there's just no way around that, are probably the ones that are going to have the best chance at success, because the playoffs are always a mental battle as much as a physical one. And I think the mental strain here will be huge, even on the teams in their own cities. I think you could even make a case if it could be worse almost if you're in your own city, but you can't do the stuff you normally do in that city and you feel more locked in. And so no one knows what's going to happen. I mean, we can't say what's going to happen on the ice, off the ice. Matthew Schneider, who works for the NHLPA, said this is like going to Mars. Nobody's ever been there. Like, we don't know what this is. And I thought that was the best analogy I've heard, because it's going to be fascinating on all kinds of levels. And as I say, my main hope here is that everyone gets through it safely and we just get to enjoy some good hockey.
Well, Toronto and Edmonton have been called worse things.
Yeah, absolutely.
There were some headlines made with so the Blue Jays are at the Rogers Center. And I saw Nazem Kadri respond to this. I want to say a couple other NHL players did too. If players are caught outside of that building, they could be fined, I think it was $750,000 and face potential jail time.
That's a government thing, though, right? That's
of course, right. But does that have any application to the NHL players at all?
It does, because essentially that's a federal government rule about breaking quarantine.
Right.
And so obviously that's at the extreme end. I'm certainly not qualified to say even and how likely it is that would happen, but that is the absolute potential fines. I think when it comes from the NHL, though, part of what can happen is you're just kicked out of the tournament right away. You essentially lose your job, you let your team down. That wouldn't be nice either. And on top of that, the teams are responsible for their players. So the teams can be fined several $100,000 as well, and dock draft picks if this happens. So I think we can call this safely about the worst thing you could do. If anyone gets photographed during this period while they're still in competition at a bar or even at a coffee shop, even if they're not doing anything wrong, you're doing something wrong if you've left a secure zone, not for one of the reasons I mentioned previously, if you've just done so on your own. And, that's why I kind of called it 5-star prison, is because you're made to stay there. That's how this is designed. That's the only way they can best keep everyone insulated from those on the outside. And I think that's the part that'll be hard. That's why what they do will be important. We haven't seen, like in the NBA, I know they're going to show movies that haven't been released yet. They're going to have concerts in their bubble. They have all kinds of things planned to try to give players something to do, because the truth is, outside of when you're playing, there's a lot of time. I think it's something NHL players battle in general. It's probably why so many of them are playing video games with you, Dangle, because they have the time to do it, right? And so it's one thing to do that in the comfort of your own home. It's another thing to do that when you can't leave the Hotel X, even as nice as it is. And so, I think the league is going to do whatever it can to keep everyone happy. But this will probably be a difficult mental challenge, as I say, for some players that have never done anything like this before.
So tomorrow training camps begin. Does that mean every player is going to be flown into their team's home city for training camps? Or how does that?
Yeah, everyone is in their home market. And so we've got 18 teams in the U.S. And at this point, it's going to be called Phase 3 of the NHL protocol. Everyone can still go home at that point, and you're still allowed to go to the grocery store or a restaurant or a bar or what have you, anywhere, obviously, that it's allowed in the area that you're in. And so this is actually the most concerning period, I believe, from a spread of the COVID-19 virus among the NHL population kind of thing. Because, what the league needs to do to not have these next 2 weeks make all the wrong headlines is try to avoid an outbreak. They know there's going to be positive tests, but it's about if it
Oh, there you go.
You're back. Hey, there he is,
Sorry,
there
you
he
died
is.
mid-sentence there.
Just to pick it up, Chris, you do expect that, the NHL expects there's going to be positive cases, because every time we've seen a positive case, people are like, well, throw the season in the garbage, it's over. So we should expect to see positive cases, especially the way things are going in the States. How does the NHL handle that so that they don't actually have to throw the season in the garbage and that they can move into stage 4 of this, which is actually playing?
There's going to be a lot of positive cases. I hate to be the one to say that, but I don't see any other way around it. You had 47% of the league that's returning players in the league haven't been tested regularly yet by their teams. And that's going to happen now, starting at training camp. And so, obviously a number of people testing anywhere in the world, not just in, professional athletes, are asymptomatic. And so there's going to be players that have this and don't even realize, and they're soon about to realize because they'll be tested. And so the key for the NHL during this phase where everyone is back in their home cities where they can mingle is that anyone who gets a positive test is immediately isolated from the team, that they follow the protocol laid out, which involves having to produce multiple negative tests before you can, come back and skate or work out or be around that team, and to make sure that there's no outbreak. That's the key here. To seeing this season finish is preventing a scenario where 15 guys on one team all get this. I'm not saying that would cancel the whole playoffs, because we've already seen the MLS in its summer tournament to rule out 2 teams that had high number of positive tests among their players, Dallas and Nashville. And I tried asking Gary Bettman about this on Saturday. Would the NHL consider that if one team had to be ruled out? And he didn't answer the question. So I don't have that answer, but I can't say 100% that they won't. But clearly the biggest fear here is not so much positive tests. Obviously we'd all prefer that everyone was healthy and no one had this, but it's just not realistic of where we're at right now. And so with a lot of players now being tested, I think it's about following the protocols, keeping distance from each other, and then obviously any positives are immediately removed, from the environment around their teammates.
Baby, it's funny to me. It's really funny to me that they didn't just bring everybody to the hub cities now.
Yeah.
Because especially if you look at like the Lightning, right? What we've seen in Tampa, what we've seen in the Florida area, like it's relative to their population, it's 250,000 people that have it. But overnight they had 15,000 new cases, right? Or that's 15,000 new positive tests. Those are just people that have been tested. Right. And so it's kind of, and obviously we saw what happened with Austin and Arizona. A lot of these southern states, Texas, are really struggling with this. And because they have governments that, for whatever reason, political will not shut them down, won't go through the protocol. So what happens when these teams from, because I believe the Coyotes are going to be in, do you know of any particular special above and beyond measures that those specific teams might be taking to say, okay, guys, like we got to make sure that we're able to make it into this tournament. We're locking you down even though you're at home.
Well, I think Tampa has taken some measures. For example, there's a couple hotels right around, their game rink in downtown Tampa there. Happens to be owned by Jeff Vinnick, who runs the Lightning.
Oh.
And, some players that don't have permanent residences there are kind of being able to create a little bit of a mini bubble in that environment. I think all players, though, honestly, not just the ones in the hotspot areas, are being sort of warned or told during this period to exercise extreme caution. Teams are even obligated to go get your groceries or do errands for you during this phase if you want. And it's not because they want to make your life easier. They want to limit the times that you have to be somewhere where you could, risk exposure to the coronavirus. So, I think that there's a huge load right now being placed on players' shoulders because they're not in that bubble environment. They're not, being segregated away, so to speak. But, you don't want to be the one that brings us into the dressing room, a week or two before the playoffs start. And so, there's a lot being asked of these guys. My guess is the vast, vast majority of players returning right now are basically going to the arena, going to their house, and that's about it. And getting errands or what have you done either by family members or the service that the teams are offering. And so it's a bit of a self-imposed bubble in your own life now for most players. But, I think everyone understands the importance of this because it literally could be one outbreak that threatens the whole thing.
100%. So you have an article up at sportsnet.ca about a doomsday scenario. Like what happens if there is? Bill Daly had a statement, I believe, in the article, Chris, about, and forgive me if I'm wrong or if I'm misquoting this, but the fact is we're going to be taking advice from the experts, the medical people, in terms of what is and isn't appropriate as we move forward and understanding COVID-19 out there and what the risks are. Nothing more than that. Obviously, we're living day to day here, and we'll see what happens. Do you get the sense that the NHL has a plan at all for something like that? Or is it sort of like it's tough to react to something they've never seen before?
They've got a plan. They're just not telling anybody what it is.
Okay.
And that includes the general managers. The GMs of the league had a call Saturday morning with the league head office, an information session. And this was discussed, again, in the sort of general terms you read there from my story, but was not laid out that, it's 32 tests is critical mass. I mean, I think really what was conveyed to the GMs, as it was conveyed to me, was that it's if the doctors feel that they've lost control of it. If it isn't just, player A, B, and B on a team, produced positive tests, they were kept aside, everyone else is fine. It would be if the spread, went right through a team or through multiple teams, that might be the scenario where they shut it down. But, the league obviously knows this is a possibility. It would be a huge cost to them financially. This is not a cheap undertaking. I think they're going to administer something in the area of 2,000 tests a day. I believe the tests are about $125 a piece. The league's brought in some commercial companies to do that. They're not using anything within the communities of Toronto or Edmonton, the sort of the public supply of these things. But I mean, you have that plus the costs of the hotels, the bubbles, all those food options I mentioned. I mean, there's a cost attached to this. And so obviously there's from a business standpoint, there's a huge desire to see this through properly. So I'm sure they have a plan, but they don't want to come out and say what it is because it might change too. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily to be secretive, but there's probably no upside for them to be that honest with us all right now.
So you're talking that they're spending probably $1 million plus a day. I mean, that's the number you just quoted me there on the test is $200,000. And then there's all the hotels and all the meals and everything else on top of it. Is that a league expense? Is that a team expense? Is it both? Like, how does that work?
It would be a league expense. I mean, keep in mind, if they get the playoffs in here, that they're due to get $200 million. I don't know exactly, for between $400 and $500 million between what's left on their TV deals. And so, it would be counted against that. But I mean, there's still revenue to be made. They're still gonna make money if this happens. It's just, the worst thing that could happen for all kinds of reasons, of course, is to start up and then have to shut it down permanently and sort of live out that doomsday scenario. And so, I think that I sense there's a high level of confidence that if they can get to the bubble scenario, they can get to the point where the games are starting and everyone's settled in the hub cities, that they can contain this and that, the threat of that is not that large. Because, even, housekeepers or someone working at the lobby bar or the front desk of these hotels, I mean, they're tested every day too. It's not just the players on the team or the equipment managers and what have you. I mean, there's a huge testing protocol here to ensure that everyone is the minute that essentially that pretty quickly they'll be found to have the symptoms if they have them or produce a positive test. So, the worst thing that can happen is starting up and shutting down. And so, I do think that if they can get through these next 2 weeks, they'll be in a good spot. But that's not a guarantee. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. As I told you, I'm excited. But none of us should get too comfortable before July 26th when the teams are due to travel.
Yeah, it seems like the next 2 weeks are the most contentious part because it's hundreds of athletes flying across North America, just all around trying to get to certain points and then living their lives within their new areas and then getting to these hub cities.
And hundreds of athletes that haven't been tested being tested now. And there will be positive results in there. I don't know how many. What's the public reaction going to be if it's a huge number? And again, I'm probably not the one to tell you what the huge number is, but I mean, it's a fine line to walk. And then obviously, what's changing with training camp starting Monday is that you're having all these players on the ice together. I mean, some teams are going to have 30, 35 guys out skating together. I'm sure they'll spread them around dressing rooms, so they're maybe not all in the same dressing room at the same time, but you're just having more people in close proximity to each other than they have been even during this previous stage where they've been doing voluntary workouts at the team facilities. And so, yes, there's all these protocols put in place, but someone might forget, someone might not put on their mask. This is a whole new world for everybody. And so this is the kind of the make or break, I think, now. I mean, obviously the first make or break was getting the deal in place and getting the players to agree to it, but now they have to not screw it up. And I don't say that lightly. I see what's going on in the MLS, in particular the soccer. I think they canceled 3 or 4 of the 10 games that they've
postponed a game this morning too. I woke up at 9 just to watch TFC, and they postponed it 5 minutes before.
There you go. And so, this could happen. Nothing exists in a bubble, even though we're talking a lot about bubbles right now. It's not as though it's because the MLS is doing it wrong. In fact, what was interesting is all the sports leagues actually agreed to their protocols sort of in concert with each other, obviously leaning on the advice from the Center for Disease Controls. But the MLS protocol doesn't look that different than the NHL ones will. And so the point is, if it can happen to them, it can happen in other leagues. And that I don't even think that anyone's saying anyone in the MLS did anything wrong. It's just, this is a highly communicable virus. It spreads easily. That's why it's basically shut down huge parts of the world and all of North America for the last 4 months. And so this is difficult. Gary Bettman termed it, we're not even at the end. We're just at the end of the beginning.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to watch. It was apparently one player on DC United that tested positive, and then there was a TFC player that came back inconclusive. So they erred on the side of caution, which I think is the right thing to do. They postponed the game. It's not canceled. We'll see what happens. And they're getting tested like crazy too. However, they chose to play in Florida, which you're asking for. You're asking for trouble down there. Even if you are secluded, it's sort of the place where it's all happening right now.
Well, you're secluded till you get injured. Then you got to go to a hospital in Florida.
Oh,
Jesus!
Same for the NBA. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, we call it the secure zone, but it's not 100%. I mean, people will leave that area, and unfortunately, I hope everyone stays healthy again. But if any player has to go somewhere, with a medical issue, they're going to a hospital in Florida during the NBA and MLS tournaments.
Right, and like there's places in Toronto. I think there's 26 hospitals or something like that, and 15 of them, reported no new COVID cases, and some have no COVID at all. And so there's, that's the difference, right? Is there's, if you're working if you're in the NHL and you got an injured player, you can bring them to a hospital where it's just not there. You know what I mean? It's just that they don't have it.
There's a scenario here, honestly, where the NHL is the only of the big sports leagues that the team sports that finishes the season. I think it's possible that happens because they brought the games to Canada. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things I want to give them credit for, but leaving that decision till the end and picking 2 Canadian cities because of what was starting to happen in the U.S. is probably the smartest decision they've made so far.
Wow.
So, but because I know you talked about it like it's a 5-star jail, and it's not an ideal scenario, and you don't want to be away from your family for even the amount of time that they committed to, let alone longer than that. But because this 2-week period is so critical, it's so unbelievably precious, is there any talk of any of these teams going to the hub cities early?
No. I don't even know if the hub cities are ready, to be honest. I mean,
right.
I do a lot of my jogs down by the CNE here in Toronto, and the Hotel X doesn't look like – there's no secure zone built around it. There's no fencing up. There's no security in place. They might be ready a couple days extra early, but I know teams have already booked flights for July 26th. And so I don't think we'll see – unless something changes. Look, I guess I shouldn't say anything that declarative. There's still 12 or 13 days. Maybe it takes a turn somewhere and they let a team come early, but I haven't heard any conversation about anyone trying to do that now.
So they're arriving the day before exhibition games start? Or 2 days?
I think 2 days. I'm pretty sure the Leafs play on the 28th, their exhibition game.
Yeah, 28, 29, 30, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope it works, man. I'm glad you mentioned the extra security because a couple days ago when Hotel X was trending and for some reason we knew the 4 hotels, Jesse and I were texting back and forth. I was just like, why do we know where they're going to live?
Yeah, I thought it was a little odd for a broadcaster to just put it on TV and be like, hey, the Leafs are going to be at the Royal York, I don't know if that's good information to have out there.
Well, because people hang out outside the hotel with giant books of please sign this. And no, don't go anywhere near them. You're not allowed.
Well, there will be fencing of some sort, though. There's going to be some sort of blockade to keep you from getting anywhere near them. Mm-hmm. I think the reason it's out there, honestly, is because the government agencies in this case have given the NHL some special privileges to be able to come here. And so the public is owed some insight into their planning that we wouldn't normally get. I know there's a debate about that. I've seen it in my timeline. I put out a picture of the Hotel X and got yelled at by half the internet for a day. But I mean, look, it's the league publishes it. It's been made very available. We can know, basically we have everything but which room each player from each team is in at this point. So I think it's part of the facts. I know the NBA did it as well. And I think that part of it is just not to hide anything. It's to show your plan, show your work, and be held accountable to the Canadian public. Because quite honestly, it might not even be the NHL that ends up having to make a doomsday call. It could be the government if the government is concerned that the league isn't following some of the things that have been agreed to here. And I think part of that is knowing which players should be where and when.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
Sorry, I've been a little lost on account of the little human who keeps waking me up throughout the night. But there was supposed to be an NHL conference call, and then there was a delay, I think, because of the Canadian federal government. What was that?
Yesterday, right?
Was that yesterday, and did that get resolved?
It's not resolved as we're talking yet. It's to do with being allowed to cross the border and what's being called the Cohort Quarantine, which is what teams are being allowed to do when they come here, instead of having to sit for 14 days without doing any activity for NHL staff. So it's been agreed upon that, say, the Boston Bruins can fly up to Toronto, a day before, 2 days before their first exhibition game and be fine, as long as they're just staying in the secure zone in the rink. But I don't think that that's been resolved for how it's going to work for all the NHL staff that's due to travel here. And let's face it, most of those people, there are some staff based in Toronto because the league has a head office here, but their main office is in New York. And so, in fact, it's not even fully decided if Gary Bettman and Bill Daly will be here. It's not to say it won't be. I think there's still time, but some of that wording is still being worked out with the federal government.
Do you think? Obviously, Vegas was the front runner in the West for a long, long time for in terms of a hub city. Toronto always seemed to be in the mix in the Eastern Conference. It just seemed to make sense. But do you get a sense of? I remember when Vegas opened up their casinos I think it would be about a month ago now, and cases spiked. Do you think it was things like that, like opening up too quickly, that led to them saying, no, let's consider Vancouver or Edmonton because we can't? Because it is surprising, really, a league that is trying so hard to build this game in the States would have two hub cities be in Canada. Just the optics of that. If you had asked me a month ago when this was still up in the air, there's no way I would have said. I would have been like, yeah, maybe one of them is Toronto, but there's no way both of them are Canadian cities. How much discussion went into that? How bad did Vegas want it? How bad did Vancouver want it? And why ultimately Edmonton?
Well, Vegas was up 4-1 in Game 7, and in the hub city discussion.
Oh. Vegas literally blew a 3-0 lead in Game 7, and you went with the – wow.
I know my audience. I see that picture of you in a Leaf jersey over Adam's head. I know who's out there.
Man.
And not to make light of it, but yeah, certainly Vegas as a city opening up at the start of June created the conditions where the NHL ultimately decided they couldn't go there. And – the league wanted to go there from the very beginning. I mean, it just makes sense. We could have sat around on March 15th. We were trying to handicap this and figured out that was a good place to go. I mean, for one, the hotels in Vegas are unmatched pretty much anywhere in North America. It's a city geared towards tourism. They're all basically resorts. You could create all those things I was talking about indoors in a place like that. And, of course, that's a negative thing for COVID-19. But in terms of a bubble, you could have just had one of those hotels blocked off with 20 restaurants in it and provided all kinds of things that players could do. But at the end, they had a huge surge in cases there. They actually had a specific problem where a lot of hotel and casino workers were getting the virus and was just making it too unstable. And I think ultimately my understanding is that the city or the tourism board or the health officials there came to the NHL and just expressed a concern that they couldn't do this safely anymore. And so, I think in some ways
Vegas would say that. That's interesting.
Well, it's that bad, and that's why, as much as I'm joking about it, I want to be serious in the sense that, the league absolutely wanted a Canadian and a U.S. hub city from the beginning. That was the plan. That made the most sense. I think Vegas was pretty much locked in, quite honestly. And then there was some debate about where the second one would go. Initially, actually, that was going to be Vegas and Columbus. seemed to be favored very early in the process. That was before we knew if the Canadian government would make any concessions when it came to the quarantine. Then Vegas and Toronto was kicked around. My understanding in that circumstance was that Vegas was going to have the Cup final and everything too, so it was going to be similar to what we have here. Then it becomes Vegas and Vancouver, and of course, BC, among the highly populated provinces in Canada, has probably been the leader. Dr. Bonnie Henry there has done a great job of communicating with the people, and everyone's followed the protocols. That looked to be done, and then Vancouver pulled out. Then it was back to Vegas, Toronto, and then at the last minute, Vegas couldn't do it, and Edmonton won because they had a strong bid all along. I think the benefit of Edmonton, for those who haven't been there, is the JW Marriott Hotel is less than a year old. Very, very nice hotel. It's right across the street from Rogers Arena. And so they can create essentially their secure zone, safe zone that includes the main game rink and where the players will stay. And in fact, the second hotel, which is the Sutton Place Hotel, all within the same safe zone. And so that's probably ideal. I think that's, one of the issues with Toronto is that it's the middle of a large city and you can't shut everything off right around Scotiabank Arena. We have, Union Station there and certainly a number of businesses and office towers connected all throughout there. So, those people still have to be able to go to work. But the way it's able to work in Edmonton is they have a very secure zone. Alberta also hasn't, I know they've had recently an issue in a hospital there, but certainly when the decision was made, they'd had very few cases, and they kind of got chose by default. Honestly, I don't say that as a shot at them. It's just I don't think the league was looking to have two Canadian hubs until that was really the only thing they felt was available to them to do it safely.
If the league is able to successfully pull this off, and you mentioned it, and I swear we're actually going to talk some hockey here coming up too. But if the league is able, Chris, to pull this off, and leagues like the MLS, the NBA, the MLB, because the MLB is still bound to determine that they're going to travel from city to city somehow. I don't know how they're going to do that.
The Jays have scheduled with Boston, like an exhibition game coming up in 3 weeks.
Really? Yeah. See, that's like an exhibition game. They're going to go and play an exhibition game.
They're just ignoring reality.
And then they're going to go to Florida like 5 times this year. Like it makes no sense. It's insane.
And I believe certain players have come out today and said, we haven't even been tested yet. Like, where are the tests? So
calling that a plan, by the way, that's like me saying I plan to go to university. And I'll tell you, the day I moved to university, I woke up in the morning, threw all my stuff in garbage bags and moved in. And that's the equivalent. That's literally the equivalent of what the MLB plan is. And that was, 18-year-old CJ. I didn't know what I was doing in a lot of ways. And I just went by the seat of my pants, and that's what the MLB is doing right now.
Wow. Okay. So, so what kind of opportunity sports-wise does this present for a league like the NHL that often struggles being muscled out with the MLB and the NBA and NFL when it's on as well? The NFL will, depending on their plan, kick into gear here in about a month and a half. So, they would maybe have to compete with NFL games, which is like competing with God in the States, right? It's just it's the biggest thing. But, if leagues like the NBA and MLS and MLB can't get it on the road, does the league have they looked at this as a potential opportunity to really gain some ground with the average sports fan in the States?
Well, I think it's hard to overstate how important that could be, honestly. I mean, what makes the Stanley Cup playoffs great under normal circumstances? It's the intensity and it's the unpredictability of what you see. I mean, it's a crazy sport. I feel like anyone, even if you don't quite understand hockey, if you watch a playoff game, it's hard not to be kind of brought in and drawn in by what you're seeing. And the fact that you have this moment in time where, let's face it, there's almost nothing on TV. I mean, nothing. I'm watching F1 races. I watched a Bundesliga soccer match at some point. Like, I'm just craving anything that's kind of sort of like what we used to have. And so I think even if the other sports get up and running, this is still a great opportunity for the NHL. I think the numbers in Canada are going to be outrageously good at the start of this, just jumping right into a best of 5 after 142 days on pause. I mean, it's insanity. I mean, it's already unpredictable as it is. We're going to see massive upsets in that first round. I mean, or that qualifying round. Like, I just think you might as well pick it out of a hat. You might do better than actually trying to use what you thought you learned, with a season that ended on March 12th. And so, it's going to be spectacular if they can pull it off. And even when you think of October hockey, right? I mean, it's more scoring. less defense. No lead is going to be safe.
Yes. Oh, well, hey, if we're Leafs fans, it never is, man.
Right.
Ever.
Exactly. So, I mean, like you're going to never be able to turn a game off early. And, I'm not rooting against the other sports because I like them as fans. I'm a huge Jays fan. Love the Raptors. Was out on the street when they won the championship last year, back when you could be around strangers. But if the NHL gets the floor to themselves in North America with team sports, I mean, I just think it's a massive opportunity. Even if you're just drawing in a few more people, I mean, it's the power of building, sort of scale. And, really, we don't know what the future holds beyond this year too. So, if they prove that they can do this right, I think it's a huge feather in their cap.
Well, let's talk about a little. You talked about the unpredictability of the play-ins and the playoffs that we're going to go into. I want to go to the Leafs because we haven't had the chance to actually break down something that's happening with the Leafs in 3 months. And it's sort of nice. It was nice today to see the Leafs roster tweeted out who's going to be at training camp. And then it has already changed. So one of the names that stuck out to me, there were two names that weren't on that list that were, I think, pretty big. The first one was Nick Petan, who has since been added. Mac Hollowell has been taken off. And number two was Jeremy Bracco. So I guess what could have happened there? Why was Nick Petan not added until several hours later? And then I guess, the follow-up to that, Chris, is where does this organization see Jeremy Bracco? Because it looked like for a while there he was going to be the next winger to come out of the minors or maybe get shipped off in a trade or whatever. It seems like he's fallen significantly and I believe he requested a trade as well.
Yeah, a couple of things there. So Petan had an injury during this phase two. The league is actually no longer, teams aren't allowed to tell us what the injury was, so I don't have any specifics on the details. And he was actually only cleared by doctors on Sunday to participate in camp, hence why they had to announce a roster without him and then quickly make that change. Tough bounce for Mac Hollowell, who would have been a great story even just to get to the camp, a guy who played for Newfoundland Growlers for a number of games this season and find himself in that sort of summer training camp would have been great for his development, but his day will still come. I think for Jeremy Bracco, you're not wrong to read this incorrectly. I mean, the Marlies were actually quite clear after the season that they did exit interviews with every player that wasn't going to be invited to this camp, and he got one right away. And so, I don't think it's a stretch or unfair to say that they weren't happy with his year. He had to leave the team for a personal reason for a period of time during the season. I don't think he took the kind of step that they were hoping to see from him. And I think his future of the organization is in serious question entering an offseason where, his contract's up. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion you see him even get a qualifying offer from the Leafs, which would be required just to keep his rights, just to make sure that they retain him as an RFA. I do think there's a scenario where they let him walk away, in part because he didn't take that step. They've got other players coming, but also because this is a difficult time when it comes to the salary cap. You don't want to be committing a one-way contract to him if you don't see him as an NHL player next year. And when you're not even inviting him to this camp where you can have, 18 forwards or 19 forwards that they're bringing, if he's not one of your 19 right now, it's hard to see him being one of their 13 or 14 next season. So, I would suggest to you we're going to see him play his next professional game for another organization, one way, shape, or another, whether it's a trade or, through free agency this summer, and the Leafs move on. He's had some great years in the AHL. I mean, I'm not saying he won't be an NHL player, but his growth certainly stagnated here in the Leafs organization the last year or two.
That's interesting. Yeah, it definitely felt that way, and the Leafs are sort of hoarders when it comes to players like that. So I'm surprised to hear you say that they may not even qualify him because, obviously, they'd have to probably let him go to free agency even if they wanted to sign him to a two-way deal, right? Because you can't RFA him. They can't sign him to a two-way deal if he's an RFA and they've retained his rights, correct?
Right. So if they gave him the qualifying offer, the player has a right just to take that offer,
right,
and be signed, or they can just continue to negotiate, and it allows the Leafs to retain his rights as an RFA. Look, I don't know the decision has been made yet either. So it's not to say he will not be qualified, but I do think they'll look to trade him if there isn't a trade to be made there. There is a scenario where maybe they just let him walk because I think he would like a fresh start, and it's probably time.
And you mentioned Nick Robertson earlier, who will be wearing number 89, which a small, insignificant portion of Twitter, but still a very loud one. We're very upset that someone would dare steal Leaf great Alexander McGillney's number, because that matters.
The first and only Leaf to wear 89.
Yeah, right. But he will be wearing 89. He will be in training camp. Doesn't mean he's going to play. But let's talk about it's sort of like the exact opposite sort of situation here with Jeremy Bracco, unfortunately. It would be nice to see them both jumping in. But Nick Robertson's growth, the fact that he was even a second-round pick last year looks like an absolute steal. What is this player? What do they have here? And does he draw in against a really tough defensive team like the Columbus Blue Jackets in, frankly, games that matter? Every game matters even more than a 7-game series against the Blue Jackets, and we'll get to that matchup in a bit. But, this is really, really important. Do you think Nick Robertson's going to play against Tortorella?
Yeah, I think we're going to see him.
CJ, let me answer the first part of Adam's question. What is he? A forward.
Fair enough. Yes.
Sorry, CJ, go ahead.
He's the right shot D the Leafs have been looking for.
That's right. He's our guy.
Instead, he's the left shot winger that's probably going to play games in this playoffs. That's my feeling about it. Obviously that's a sense more than, that decision hasn't been made either. This is what I'll say. What jumps off the page about Nick Robertson is 55 goals in 46 games in the OHL. I mean, even if you don't watch Ontario Hockey League games, obviously you're excited if you're a fan of the Leafs about that kind of production. What a team that told me that was looking at drafting him last June that they loved about him was they were a little worried about his size because he's a little bit more my height than a typical NHLer's height. But they loved his mind. They felt that he had a professional's mindset, I think was the word that they termed. And they felt that alone would allow him to sort of overcome anything that might be put in his way. And the Leafs have learned that since picking him, if they didn't know that themselves, when they did draft him 53rd overall in 2019. This guy has absolutely used every resource the organization's made available to him. And obviously playing for the Leafs, they can do a lot more than most other teams. He told me he had over 100 text messages with their nutritionist. He would literally send her pictures of his meals for feedback all year long. He said that the strength coaches are annoyed with me. I know they're annoyed with me because every off-ice workout he would videotape and make sure he's doing it right and seek feedback on his form. He's obviously really approached this, I think, in a serious manner. And then he has this great year in the OHL. He plays well at the World Juniors. He's put himself in this position where the organization can't help but look at him. I mean, and consider playing him in these games. And I think it's the mind that could make this possible. Because, if the Leafs do play him, we're not looking at a top 6 role, absent injuries or the things that might happen. But that's not going to be the position they're putting him in. They're not going to be playing him on the number 1 power play, looking for him to repeat those goal totals that he had in junior, at least not at this stage. And so I think that he has to be able to show that he's got the mindset. And honestly, something as silly as picking 89 to me shows that he has a little bit of that mindset. He's just a supremely confident, very businesslike about how he goes about things. If you've seen his Instagram videos about working out, I mean, he's an absolute tank for, someone he's not that tall in stature, but he's very, very thick, strong on his skates, works out like a fiend, and is doing absolutely everything to maximize his ability based on what's been given to him. And I know he's opened eyes in a huge way in the Leafs organization because of all those things. And so even the fact that he came up here, quarantined for 2 weeks at a friend's house in Windsor because he was back in LA where his family lives during the initial part of the pause, and then has been in all these optional workouts since June 8th, the phase 2 workouts the Leafs have been doing. I think he's got a real shot to play. And then, we might look at the lineup itself with Andreas Johnston being a left winger that the Leafs would like to have for a series like this. I just think that there's a natural spot for him on the left side of the third line. Might give the Leafs bottom 6 a bit more punch. Which, it was something I think was missing, especially later part of the season before the pause. And so, if he plays well, it's all in his hands. I really don't think Kyle Dubas is bluffing when he says they're not gonna say, well, we got to keep his contract for the future. I think the Leafs really are trying to win a Stanley Cup right now, and if he's one of their best 12 options, he'll be playing.
It's so funny because, and it's Steve, I think I'm asking this question for Steve.
Go ahead.
Nick Robertson didn't draw into a game when Mike Babcock was coach in October this season, which is weird to say. All of those things that happened this season. And I wonder if Mike Babcock is still the coach. I wonder if this is an option, right? You have to wonder about that and the change. And I don't need to we don't need to speculate about that.
No, I'll speculate. There's no chance.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
And that's not, on Nick. But I mean, look, this is a dynamic, and I know this from speaking to GMs around the league. Like, this isn't just a Leafs dynamic. The biggest obstacle sometimes for the front office to do what they want is they're on their own coaching staff. I mean, it's convincing the person who's making those decisions each shift, and then there's a lot of decisions in a game for a head coach, if they feel comfortable with that. And I would say most old school hockey coaches, especially entering a best of 5 with one exhibition game, would just not feel comfortable with even the idea of dressing this player as one of your 12 or even 13 forwards if you went 13, if you, whatever you're doing. But I think that Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas are just so on the same page. And this is something, if since the front office is willing to do it, I think Sheldon is. So that answers your question. I really just don't think this universe
crazy.
Look, and he might be a camp, but I think I'd be answering this question about whether he might play totally differently if Mike Babcock was on the bench.
I just look at the Leafs lineup, and you mentioned they're probably not going to throw him to the Lions right away with a top 6 role, but I look at their bottom 2 centers, and assuming Kerfoot is C3, there's a pass first guy, and Jason Spezza I think is a pass first guy. I'm looking at Nick Robertson's numbers with the Beats, 55 goals in 46 games. His center, also a Leaf prospect, SDA, 63 assists, 12 goals. That's it. So do you think they're jacked about the idea of putting him with a playmaking center like that, or are they going to continue that Kerfoot at left wing experiment they were doing?
I'd be surprised if they did, because remember, we're getting Ilya Mikheyev back as well.
Right.
So, what I'm expecting is that Mikheyev will go back in his spot that he's on, if we want to call it the second line, the Tavares line with Marner. Could be a first line anywhere else in the league, pretty much. And then, that gives you this option on the third line. I mean, they didn't want to play Kerfoot, I don't think, too much on the wing, realistically. It's just they had a hole there after Mikheyev went down. They tried Kasperi Kapanen on his offside in that position there. Didn't really work. It wasn't successful. They'd actually put him back there the last game against Tampa that they played before the break. But now with Mikheyev back, look, there's an X factor there. I don't know if he'll be able to do what he used to do because of the severity of the injury he had. I would have to think there's almost some PTSD associated with that. I mean, it was a very scary situation that he had getting some arteries cut by a skate. But at least to start, I think you got Hyman, Matthews, and Nylander. Maybe with Hyman and Nylander switch, because Nylander seems to like the left side now. Then you got Mikheyev with Tavares and Marner, and then that's where I think you might see on the left side there, instead of someone like Pierre Engvall, for example, being an option. To me, Robertson makes a whole lot of sense with Kerfoot and Kapanen on your third line.
And then, do you have Engvall, Petan, and
I got
Agostino?
I got
Spezza?
I got Spezza on there. I think Clifford will start.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Goat too. I mean, Goat and Spezza kind of were shifting back and forth between wing and center together. That's
not bad.
My rough sense of what this is going to end up as.
Chris, when we're talking about the Leafs against the Blue Jackets, it almost, if we were going to base it on what the team we saw in December versus, say, the Leafs team we saw in February, early March before the season, and I believe the game against Nashville was canceled like a couple hours before it was due to play. And I had a friend that was going, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm going to the Nashville game tonight." I'm like, "Have fun. It might be your last game for a while." And then it didn't happen. I'm wondering, the Leafs team we saw in December seemed frail. Well, they were on the 20-game win streak. Sorry, January they seemed to kind of peter out a little bit after the bump of Sheldon Keefe coming in as the head coach. And so there were two Leafs that you saw. Like, there were two Leafs teams you saw this year. There was the Babcock Leafs, obviously, and then the Keefe Leafs. But then they seemed to regress back to what they were at the beginning of the season. And you said to us, months ago when we were talking that you felt like that they were starting to get things back on the road and that they felt like they got their groove back a little bit. How does this team match up against the Blue Jackets, who play a very tidy, tough defense game, where the Leafs do not and don't have the same structure that the Blue Jackets have? The Blue Jackets have done a lot with very little.
They have. I think the Leafs have an opportunity here to beat the Blue Jackets the way Boston beat Toronto the last 2 years, which is with the power play. There's a huge disparity in this series between high-end talent from one side to the other, at least offensively. I mean, obviously the Blue Jackets have some stud defensemen in Werenski and Jones. But the Leafs have offensive weapons that, frankly, Columbus can't match. That doesn't mean anything. We could have said that about Tampa going into last year's first round, and Columbus beat them in 4 straight. And so, I think it's going to be a bit of a grind for the Leafs. And I think, for them to have success, I mean, it'll always come down to goaltending either way in any playoff series. And then beyond that, I think Toronto has a real opportunity to hold the edge in the specialty teams. And in a series as quick and where the margin might be quite small between winning and losing, I think that's of utmost importance for the Leafs that they bury the Blue Jackets, because to me, they should be able to outskate them in a lot of areas. They should be able to goad them into some penalties just with the way they can move the puck around and the way they like and prefer to control the puck. And I think you'll see the Blue Jackets try to be physical, and you might see some aggression type penalties, and then Toronto can make them pay in that area. And if they're not able to do that, it could go the other way. I mean, but I think this is a pretty good matchup for the Leafs. By no means is it easy, but if you go right down the list, other than the 2-5-12 matchups on either side, which is Edmonton, Chicago in the West, and then Montreal, Pittsburgh in the East, I mean, most of these series are it's a razor thin. I mean, I think the Leafs and the Blue Jackets at the same point total, if I'm not mistaken, when the season was paused. I know Vancouver and Minnesota, I think, were separated by a point. They're playing the West. I mean, all of these are kind of coin flip scenarios. But I think the fact that Columbus beat Tampa the way they did will have the Leafs' attention and respect. It will certainly be something the coaching staff reminds them of as they go into that series. And, I think that this is a series the Leafs should win. But, it's one thing to draw it up on paper or try to evaluate it from my kitchen. It's another thing to see it played on the ice.
And Josh Anderson apparently is still not going to draw in, still injured. How big is that, in terms of what Toronto's going to face?
Well, you think of a guy like him being a playoff player. I mean, for me, he at his best is got some Tom Wilson-like qualities. He's big. He skates well. He had a great offensive season last year. He had a miserable year this year. I think the injuries played a factor in that, and for whatever reason, his season never got up and running. But I don't expect to see him at all in this round. So he's not someone Toronto's going to have to contend with. But the Blue Jackets have a guy by the name of Liam Foudy, who is a Canadian national junior team player. Looks like he might get the Nick Robertson treatment in this series and get thrown in there. So, just because, Anderson's down doesn't mean the Blue Jackets can at least come with certainly not the same type of player. Foudy's more offensively gifted, but, there's opportunities in their depth chart, I think, to introduce some unknown quantities here. And, I think what's kind of interesting, big picture, probably for all the series, though, is that the coaches never have this much time to prepare for an opponent. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it was May 26th that this format was officially confirmed. And so, you can't imagine that the Blue Jackets have played any meaningful hockey in the last couple of seasons, and the Leafs haven't looked at the videos, studied their tendencies, looked at their player usage, vice versa. And so the training camps to me are so interesting just because you got to think that coaches are going to throw wrinkles in there, whether it's different personnel usage or, maybe new power play formations or things like that, it can at least keep the other team on its toes. And so, I think the coaching matchup in this series is fascinating. It just turns out that John Tortorella is actually one of the people that is a mentor to Sheldon Keefe. He was actually his coach for a time with the Tampa Bay Lightning back when Keefe was a player. I know he cited him as someone that he's really appreciated as a coach and has tried to borrow from. But, obviously you have a huge disparity in experience, at least at the NHL level between these two guys. And I do think coaching will play an important role in these types of series. So, I think this will be kind of an interesting chess match. But ultimately, if the Leafs lose this series, no matter how it happens, I think they'll be disappointed. I mean, they'll go into this series for the first time of any of the last 3-4 years, counting the Washington and the Bostons. This is the first one where they really believe they should be favored, and I think that's a fair way of categorizing it.
Do you get the sense internally that the management and players expect a deep playoff run, or expectations kind of up in the air because we're in a scenario that no one's ever seen before?
No, the Leafs think they have an advantage. They had almost their entire team back here on June 8th when was the first day you could start having those small group workouts. Those were entirely voluntary around the league. A number of teams have only opened their facilities in the last week. And the Leafs have had, a month now where their players have been skating together. I think they've done some social things together, at least that you can still do, like up in cottage country kind of vibe. I think that they see an advantage in the fact that they have a pretty young team, because let's face it, this layoff is going to affect different teams different ways. And, even just symbolically, the fact that so many players bothered to show up for those small group workouts that they didn't have to be at, I think is a sign that the players are enthusiastic about playing. And, I can't tell you what teams weren't, but I do know there are teams out there for sure that weren't totally sold on this plan, that didn't think it would ever happen, that, maybe some of those players, whether it was on purpose or just, the subconscious of all the uncertainty around this, maybe didn't work out as hard as they should have or keep their conditioning at a level. And, I think the Leafs feel that they have advantage in all those areas. Young team, fitness level at a high level. They've been skating together for a while. I think that they intend to win the Stanley Cup, honestly. That's not to say they're going to, but I don't get the feeling that this is just it's nice it's in the city and maybe this will work out for us. Like, I think they are preparing for a long run, and I think they should, quite honestly. I mean, if you look at the teams they've lost to in the playoffs the last couple of years, as painful as that been, and I know it feels familiar because you got Game 7s against Boston, but, Boston then went to Game 7 of the Cup final. And they probably didn't deserve to beat the Leafs if you look at the full balance of last year's series. The year before was a different story. 2018, the Leafs were probably fortunate to hang on and force a Game 7. But I think the Leafs carried the play in a lot of last year's series. And so, it struck me watching the Last Dance documentary, way back at the start of this pause, that, even the Bulls were, once upon a time labeled as a team, Michael Jordan's Bulls, that couldn't get over the hump. They kept losing to Detroit. And you have to just sort of make that first step, and it's in there. And I think the Leafs feel, even though they haven't won a playoff series since you guys were all in diapers or roughly Leo's age, that all it's going to take here is beating Columbus and getting a momentum going and using all the things that can work in their favor, and that this could be a special summer and fall in Toronto rather than spring.
Adam, just to emphasize what Chris just said, you and I think were in Ottawa at the Sears Drama Festival the last time the Leafs won a playoff series.
That would have been grade 10, grade 11?
That was grade 10.
There you go.
For the two of us. You mentioned
you should see some pictures. You got to find some 2004 pictures.
Oh my God.
I have us in full makeup. I have us in full makeup and everything.
Yeah, and just be like, the last time the Leafs won a playoff series, this was Adam and I.
Yeah.
And leather pants. Were you in leather pants yet, Adam?
Was it leather pants?
That was a little later. Adam was a front man of the band.
Wow. I bet. It's funny to think, because it has been that long, and I wonder even if they're able to get through Columbus, even if that's not technically a first round playoff win, because it's not, if that will get the motor running a little bit, get the ball rolling. Okay, so this is what it feels like to actually win something, and they can win it without, and then they can go into the next series, whoever that happens to be against, and go, okay, we've done this. Even though it's not technically the first round, they still feel like there's something here and we can do this. The one thing that we keep talking about every time Toronto loses to Boston, and I guess the Capitals as well, was and this has been a long-term issue with the Leafs, is Freddie Anderson and the amount of games he's playing. Is he healthy? Is he rested? We have a fully healthy, rested Freddie Anderson, but he could be rusty. What do we expect from a fully healthy, fully rested, potentially rusty Freddie Anderson? Because Freddie was, for a while, known as a bit of a slow starter. His October numbers weren't great. Some of that's gone away. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think two things. At least they have Jack Campbell now behind them, which I think gives them a little more security than you've seen, at least since the Curtis McElhinney years, behind Anderson. And I think that this plays right into Freddie's hands. He's one of these guys that we're all like this in our own lives at certain degrees. He's his own worst enemy. Like, the reason he's played so much hockey, partly it's because they maybe haven't always had the backup behind him to split the starts more evenly, but he wants to play that much. I think that he likes that, but it might not always have been to his utmost benefit. And, now he's had that long stint at Austin's place in Scottsdale. I know he actually left there a couple weeks before Austin came back and was down in California with his trainer down there that he normally works with in the off season. And then he came up here to Toronto and has been on the ice at least the last 2 or 3 weeks before training camp. And I think this is the perfect remedy for him in what, was statistically his worst year as an NHL player. I've gotten the sense from those that know Anderson well that he doesn't believe it was actually his worst year, that he thinks that there's some extenuating circumstances that maybe tell us a little bit more than those numbers. But still, the facts are the facts. He didn't stop the puck as frequently this season as he has at any other point at the same rate. And so, I think anyone that had a year they didn't love is going to love this reset, because there's no tie to what happened. I mean, it goes down in history officially as the extension of the 1920 season, but this is a total break. Like,
Yeah.
I'm still having trouble remembering who's on the team, and certainly, other teams. Like, your brain just hasn't gone there for 4 months too often.
Especially traded players like Patrick Marleau's in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Who was the guy for you, CJ? Because I was looking and I went, Dennis Malgin. I forgot he was a Leaf, man.
Dennis Malgin. That was who kind of stuck out to me too. I mean, because he's sort of a quiet guy, played a few games, but it's. I just think for Freddy that this reset will be huge, and the fact he is healthy, and yeah, he might be a little bit rusty to start. I think all goalies are going to face that issue, but he still has 13 days of camp. He's got an exhibition game. He's got another couple more days of camp. I mean, he's got a lot of time here facing shots and getting back in the rhythm. And man, things could line up for a team like the Leafs. Honestly, I do think that I like this scenario for them. I think it's good for them to be in Toronto for 2 rounds. Although I do wonder about our social distancing practices if they do go on a run and win a round or win more in a round. Are people going to abide by those things?
No, they're not. But
if they win, there's going to be a parade.
There will be an impromptu parade. There's no question.
If they win a best of 5, you think the streets are full?
Oh, I don't know about the best of 5, but I think they win. No. They get in the second or third round, and you start to see people. I think people want to see them get into the playoffs because, frankly, they are not in the playoffs yet.
Do the Leafs need to lose for the good of the world?
That'll be a hot take in one of the local.
Yeah, we did you guys a big favor and lost again.
Yeah. Could we be cheering for? Oh, I was about to say the Panthers. Let me redact that. I don't know, but not a Canadian team, man. I don't know. Could go real bad.
You'll be making a Lafreniere video before you know it.
No, yeah, exactly.
Gimme. That might be better, just from a troll's perspective. No, it wouldn't.
In the record books, though, this is technically all these teams have made the playoffs, correct?
Sort of. Like any goals scored will go down as playoff stats.
Okay.
But it doesn't affect the playoffs as it pertains to the trade conditions that are out there. So
it's a middle meshing area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're all just going to pretend it didn't happen. Honestly.
Yeah. It sounds that way. Chris, there are so many cool matchups happening here. I know that you mentioned there are some teams that are not necessarily thrilled to be in this. Montreal being one of them. But I mean, there's going to be some really fun things. I mean, the round robin's interesting. Philly, Boston, Capitals, Tampa. And if you've kind of lost track of, I know the guys on this call haven't, but basically, if you've lost track of why they're doing that round robin, it's to determine the 1 through 4 seed. So it's Philly, Boston, Washington, and Tampa on one side, and then in the Western Conference, you've got St. Louis, Colorado, Dallas, and Vegas, and everybody else has the best of 5 play-in. So I'm just going to go through the matchups here quickly. We've got New York versus Carolina. That's the Rangers versus Carolina. We got Florida versus the Islanders. You've got Montreal and Pittsburgh, as Chris mentioned, the Leafs and Columbus. And then in the West, you've got Chicago, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Calgary, Arizona, Nashville, and Minnesota, Vancouver. So this is a question for everybody. If you were to pick a series in those not the round robins, the best of 5s, that really kind of sticks out to you as a series that you think is going to be pretty hotly contested, that you think it's going to be a series that you got to watch. Chris, we'll start with you. What do you think in the Eastern Conference? What do you think is going to be the series to watch?
Oh, then you tagged the Eastern Conference on me. I was going to say Calgary, Winnipeg, but
okay. So we'll start with the West then. Calgary, Winnipeg.
Yeah, I think that one will be legit. It was a strange year for both teams, but an opportunity now to go through each other and get to the first round officially. I think that one will be razors thin. Calgary probably has the edge in some of it. The goaltending goes to Winnipeg, and I just think they'll be hating that series. It just feels like kind of a Western Canadian rivalry. I mean, it's maybe we wouldn't think of them as traditional rivals, but certainly they play each other a lot. And those all Canadian games, I think, take on a different feel usually during the regular season. And I just expect that one to be some pretty entertaining hockey.
Steve, what do you like in the West? We'll go West first.
Well, okay, I know this isn't West, but there was some talk about Carey Price could disrupt the whole Penguins thing from the 5th-12 angle. Dude, the Chicago Blackhawks are not the nicest matchup for the Edmonton Oilers, man. I think Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl could get in there and completely spank them. But the Blackhawks, despite trading Leonard and everything, remember when Leonard was a Leaf for 5 minutes and then he got traded to Vegas?
Yep.
I look at a team's skill and I look at their chemistry as huge advantages in this best of 5 thing. A lot of the Chicago core has been together forever and they're insanely skilled. And it's best of 5. Edmonton's goaltending is that one could be very interesting.
And they just got gifted a playoff game, essentially. They had no chance to make the playoffs, right?
No.
This core didn't know if they were ever going to play another playoff game together again. And I know we're saying there's a debate whether this is playoffs or not, but let's call it playoffs. They get to play meaningful hockey and play the spoiler.
And we talked about players who could use a rest with Freddie Anderson. Duncan Keith, that guy had ridiculous miles on him, and now he's just posting all these thirst traps on Instagram, looking like Thanos. Chicago could be a problem, man. They could be a real problem.
Jesse, what do you like in the West?
That's the matchup I was gonna go with, and I was gonna mention Corey Crawford because I don't know where he is right now in terms of his skill set. I know he was below 500. His record was during the regular season, and I just don't know going into that matchup if he shows up. I think Chicago could be a problem. I still think Edmonton comes out of there. I think I picked them actually to come out of the West, but Chicago could be a serious problem just to test them. Maybe send it to 5 games in that first round.
I'm going to go with Chris, Winnipeg, Calgary for me in that. I just think that they are tale of two teams, right? You've got Calgary that should have been great, Winnipeg that shouldn't have been, and they both kind of met in the middle. And I think it's going to be sort of fun to see where that ends up. Now let's go with the East. Chris, what matchup do you like in the qualifying round? What's your favorite one to watch? It can be the Leafs if you want it to be, but what one interests you the most?
I'd say Carolina Rangers, which, might seem like a hipster pick or something. But, for me, what's interesting about this one is Carolina was one of the 2 teams that voted against this playoff format when it was at the NHLPA executive board level. And, they had trouble with the Rangers in the regular season. I think they've had trouble historically against them. Obviously Carolina, I think is a team that actually could go on a run here too. I think that they are sort of a sleeping giant as an organization and will probably be a powerhouse if they're not already quite there yet. Obviously, they're getting Dougie Hamilton back in this series, but, we could see Henrik Lundqvist. We're going to see Artemi Panarin. I think that matchup's interesting and sort of getting a window into the process, knowing that the Hurricanes weren't all that thrilled about their draw in the way that this worked out. I think just makes that a little bit of a tasty sidebar for that series.
Steve?
I was going to say Carolina, New York as well. They're 2 pretty young teams. They're the embodiment of fun. Carolina's this team that we keep saying, they're going to take a step. They're going to take a step. They're going to take a step. And they look good last year. The Rangers, honestly, I know they were kind of far back. The way they were chugging along, I picked them on camera before this all shut down to make the playoffs in the East. I just really like that team. Love everything they're doing. With that rebuild, and I just think it'll be a really fun, high-scoring series.
All you needed was a pandemic for that prediction to come true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was right.
Jesse, what about you?
I'm going to go somewhere different. I'm going to pick a round-robin matchup. I think Tampa-Boston is going to be the most interesting thing we see at the first round in the East. Because it's the best team in the regular season versus the best team over the last 2 years. And I think their top-end players outside of Pasternak are a little on the older end, so I'm excited to see how this little layoff affects those guys. And then you have Tampa, who's just been – it seems like they've been going since this thing has been on pause. They've all been out all these practices, just practicing real hard, and I want to see how they come out. So I'm interested to see.
And no Steven Stamkos.
Right, no Stamkos.
Maybe. Injury, maybe. Who knows?
I want to see how that ends up. And maybe Tampa comes in there and they take the number 1 seed away from Boston, who should have had it by default based on the standings.
Yeah, they should have.
Take it away from them, which would be crazy interesting.
I'm going to go with Montreal and Pittsburgh. And the reason I think Montreal and Pittsburgh is because this could be the last. I think this determines where Carey Price is, and that might be a bold statement. But Carey Price once was the best goalie in the world. I don't know that he is anymore. But if he is, and he decides to be now, which is, he's in his 30s now. He's, we're into that contract that, may or may not look good. If Carey Price is the Carey Price that we knew, Olympic gold medal Carey Price, dragging the Montreal Canadiens to wherever they were going to go Carey Price, the Montreal Canadiens could upset a lot of people. Now, I know that if, Max Domi is still unsure yet, they're going to take 7 to 10 days to figure out whether he's going to be there. 17 goals in 70 games this year. That's an important part for a team that doesn't score a lot of goals. But to me, if you have Carey Price potentially shutting down Malkin and Crosby, and I know very well that it could go completely the other way, what a story. And if he gets hot, when Carey Price gets hot, he's almost unbeatable. The question is, can he get hot like he used to anymore? And that's what I don't know, and I think this series is going to say a lot.
There was that interesting little tidbit. I don't know if you saw this, CJ, going around of I think it was what Crosby's been doing over the past couple of weeks, and Malkin just messaging the rest of his teammates like, you better be ready. You only have so many chances to win the Stanley Cup, and we're going to go for it. And a lot of the reaction to it, and I kind of agreed with it, was imagine being locked in a hotel with that person.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's one thing to have him as your teammate and you can escape from him and you only got to deal with him a couple hours a day. Imagine you're locked in the same building as that guy for 2 months.
You could see how Phil Kessel and him maybe didn't get along.
Yeah.
But a little bit of a different personality clash there. Speaking of which, and I think it's fun, we should shout out the Coyotes because they are in the best of 5. Taylor Hall and Phil Kessel both have underplayed what we thought that they were going to be, and I think what the Coyotes were hoping they were going to be. Is this an opportunity for Taylor Hall? This is going to be a tough free agency for him. Is this an opportunity for him to recoup some money? And do you see them hitting kind of the reset on their season, Chris? Because it was a little up and down. They had some really good successful moments and then sort of fell out of it.
Well, yeah, and they get a reprieve too. They were far from a guarantee to make the playoffs. So they were still in the race, but they were on the wrong end of the race. I think for Taylor Hall, that's going to be awesome. Remember, he just had his first playoff appearance a couple years ago in New Jersey. So it's not something he's had a lot of experience at. I think it lasted 5 games in a series with Tampa. So, when you play as long as he has, I think just to even get into those games, if you can even put the free agency aside for a period of time here, that's going to be great for him. And, I don't know if he can get his money back. This is going to be the strangest free agency we've ever seen.
Ever.
I'm not saying it'll be Taylor Hall, but there's going to be someone that just takes a 1 or 2 year deal that typically would be signing for 6. Just because I think that it's probably a sensible bet to leave your options open to become a free agent again. But it could mean you move once and you got to move again. In Taylor's case, he had to move in season. I'm sure he would prefer to get a little bit of security if he could, but that's going to limit the number of teams that are bidding for him. And so, whether it's him or Alex Pietrangelo, we probably don't want to get to the offseason yet before we've even seen if the playoffs happen. But I think that this is if you love stuff that doesn't happen on the ice in hockey, the next year is going to be bananas because you have an expansion draft, you have a flat salary cap, you have the uncertainty that I think everyone's going to be feeling their way around the new CBA and some of the rules. And you just don't have a lot of teams that can go out there and inflate the market. And so, I think we'll see some crazy trades, and certainly free agency is going to be tough for guys like Taylor Hall and Alex Pietrangelo. But, they're still the best players available at their position. They're still going to make out quite well.
I don't want to talk about the Leafs offseason yet, but I did read a very funny article on sportsnet.ca about from Ian McIntyre about the Canucks situation and how this is supposed to be them entering a golden era, and all they can think about is all the terrible contracts they've signed the last 3 summers that everybody said were terrible at the time. And now given the world that we're in, almost impossible to unload some of these deals. And it means guys like Stetcher and Tanev and that sort of thing just may have to walk. And they've got new deals, I think, coming for Pettersson in a couple of seasons or one more season. And they're in some serious trouble already with the cap.
Yeah, they're in jail. I think that the concern around that team is legit. there's two ways of looking at this. They have two of the best, brightest young players in the game. So they have the hard part, on their roster. This is where the Leafs were before they had their key guys signed, is that everyone's like, oh, that's going to be a huge problem. And I'm like, yeah, but it's the problem every team wants. Like, they're going to be arguing between, do we pay him $10 million or $11 million a year? And it's because he's worth it. It's not because, they're not making it up with other things. The problem, of course, is that making that all work, how do you create the space? You'll probably see them entertain a buyout maybe in this offseason. Certainly might have to be on the losing end of some trades just to shed salary. Mm-hmm. But, when you have talent wins. And we've already seen that Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes are more than capable of dragging along a roster that has some significant holes and taking them to some special places. So, I think that Vancouver's in a great spot on one hand because they have those players. It's going to be a rocky, difficult job for the front office. They have a bonus overage this year. I don't know what the number is, but they basically spent over the cap in the 2019-20 season. So you add that to all the other problems.
And the cap recapture and everything else.
And a cap recapture. And next year, Pettersson's still in his entry-level deal, and if he finishes in the top 10 in goals or goals per game, which is very possible, he gets a $2 million bonus added on. It's not pretty. And so – yeah, everyone that's out there getting angry about this and keeping sports radio in business, there's a reason for it. It's not invented. It's not a problem that's coming like in the distant future here. It's as soon as this summer tournament's over. So maybe they want to make good use of the time they have now, because it's going to be hard to put a good team around those core pieces with some of the other issues they got.
One of the things you said maybe a couple months ago was once all these games start getting going, bet on a team with a lot of Swedes. Were Elias Pettersson, because their arenas were open basically the whole time, were Elias Pettersson and Jakob Markstrom practicing together in Sweden? I can't remember the answer to this.
No, I'm pretty sure Pettersson wasn't able to skate much, if at all, when he was over there.
He was injured, wasn't he?
No, it was more he was in a part of the country that didn't have arenas open. A lot of the guys that were near Stockholm and Gothenburg were skating, but those that live in the north, like Victor Hedman went back at one point. I don't think he was able to skate much. So, you're going to have to look at where your Swedes spent their time in quarantine if you're going to take me up on my tongue-in-cheek.
My first thought was William Nylander, and then I saw he was in North America, and I'm like, come on, that's not as fun.
I think he was walking like the Sunset Strip without a shirt on with Alex Nylander. Like he seemed to be thriving, seemed to be having a great time.
Oh, he was having hot boy summer for sure. And sorry, it was a consistent point brought up with Taylor Hall. Just to go back to what you said. So if there was a goalie out there who had a .925 save percentage last year and a .928 save percentage this year, you'd probably call him one of the best goalies in the league, right? Darcy Kemper.
Yep.
If we're looking for monkey wrenches in this little tournament, that could be a big one, because his injury killed their season, and it just happened to sort of line up with Taylor Hall joining that team.
Interesting. Well, it'll be very, very fun to watch. I'm excited about it. I'm glad we got to talk about it. Chris, thank you, as always, for your time. It's so nice, because I think the last time we talked to you, it was like, what does the next 8 million years look like? And now it's like, hey, we're a couple weeks away potentially here, assuming everything goes well. So I know that things are going to get crazy busy for you, and I know that they were this week. So thank you for carving out this much time before you got to go back to work for real tomorrow. For us and for this audience, we really, really appreciate it.
For real.
Anytime, man. Like, honestly, I had some dark days during this thing. This thing was difficult. And I shouldn't complain. Like, I should say, first off, I kept my job. Luckily, my health has been good, and that of my family. And so I know there's a lot of people out there with worse off, but this was difficult. And so I feel that's why I feel so great now. The weather's turned here the last few weeks. Little Leo has graced us with his presence. We got games on the schedule. I mean, it just feels like, holy crap, this is happening. So let's hope again that everyone does this safely, and that we get to watch just a crap ton of hockey here the next few weeks.
Amazing. And we'll hopefully check in with you, although I don't expect that we're going to have much we're going to get to connect with you, because you're going to be so busy, but we'll be watching and cheering along. So Chris, thanks so much. Great to see you again. Great to talk to you again. The official or unofficial fourth member of the show, let's be honest, Chris Johnston from Sportsnet. Follow along at Reporter Chris on Twitter. I mean, if he's not, really, he is like the fourth member. We're just not allowed to hire him.
Yeah.
So
we're gonna have to book him on Cameo if we want him over the next couple months.
100%. But Chris, thanks for your time, man. We really appreciate it.
No problem. I'm just like the guy that drops in every once in a while, plays a little bass, and gets out of here.
Yeah, I love it.
The Steve Dangle Podcast. Follow the guys on Twitter at Steve_Dangle, at Adam WYLDE, and at Jesse Blake. Brought to you by Panago Pizza. Order at panago.com and stuff your face with deliciousness. Connection complete.